gentle rhythm. But she carried the awareness of what had transpired, knowing that life could change in an instant and that preparedness, patience, and loyalty were her greatest allies. Coda and Rex, her silent guardians, had proven once again that vigilance and loyalty, combined with calm and presence, could guide them through any uncertainty, keeping her safe while teaching her the quiet power of trust and partnership. The afternoon sun was warm against her skin, casting long shadows across the yard. She had spent the morning moving through the house, completing small tasks, but her mind remained alert. Even though the stranger's car had disappeared, she could not shake the feeling that something was still in the air. Her instincts were honed for moments like this. She had learned over the years that the world often changed without warning, and that awareness and preparedness were the only ways to navigate uncertainty safely. Her two dogs, Coda and Rex, mirrored her alertness. They followed her from room to room, ears twitching at every distant sound, bodies coiled like springs ready to act if needed. She watched them closely, noting how they subtly adjusted their positions to stay between her and potential threats. The bond she shared with them was profound. It went beyond loyalty or training. It was an understanding built over countless mornings, walks, and quiet nights. In that understanding, she felt a sense of security, even amid rising tension, as she looked out the window. She noticed a small group of people walking briskly down the street. Nothing in itself was unusual, but there was a coordinated movement, sense of purpose in their steps that triggered a flicker of unease. Her gaze sharpened, scanning for any sign that they might come closer. Her dogs stiffened immediately, muscles taut, tails low but alert. She felt that familiar, instinctive surge of focus. The bodies, it's a natural response to sensing potential danger. She stepped onto the porch, letting the dogs flank her naturally. Their presence was commanding but calm, a signal to anyone approaching that she was not defenseless. She watched the group slow as they neared the corner, glancing at her property. Something about their hesitation and repeated glances confirmed her intuition. They had noticed her, and her dog's posture had made them reconsider. She remained still, breathing evenly, letting the moment stretch while silently communicating to Coda and Rex that she trusted them completely. The group eventually moved closer, their steps careful and measured. She considered her options. Running was never necessary. Panic never solved anything. Speaking firmly, clearly, and calmly could influence the situation. But she needed to rely on her dog's instincts too. She had trained them not to react aggressively unless provoked, but their presence alone could alter the energy in the air. It had worked before, subtly, and now she trusted it to guide the next moments. Suddenly, one of the people stepped slightly ahead of the others, seemingly taking the lead. She noted their posture, the tilt of the head, the way their hands were held not aggressively but with a readiness that set her pulse racing. Her dogs moved instinctively, adjusting their positions. Coda positioned himself slightly ahead of her, chest forward, body tense but under control. Rex stayed close, scanning the surroundings with sharp, unblinking focus. The silent communication between her and her dogs was seamless, instinctive, and powerful. She spoke quietly, but with a firm tone that carried beyond the porch. "This is my property," she said, keeping her hands visible, her voice calm. "Please do not come closer without permission." Her words were steady, measured, and respectful, yet carried authority. The lead person paused, seemingly reassessing the situation. Her dogs did not growl or bark, but the protective energy they projected was unmistakable. The stance, the gaze, the readiness, it all combined into an invisible barrier that spoke louder than words. The person hesitated, and she noticed the others in the group shifting slightly, looking to the lead for direction. She remained on the porch, still calm, her dogs flanking her, and she realized the power of presence. Often, the simplest gestures, the quietest signals, carried the most meaning. Coda's chest was forward, his eyes fixed, muscles taut but controlled. Rex remained coiled at her side, a steadying force, eyes sweeping the yard. They were ready to act, not out of aggression, but out of instinctive protection. Time seemed to stretch. Every moment counted. She felt her heart beat slow, focusing on her breath, her posture, her awareness of every detail. She could see the leader's eyes flick toward the dogs repeatedly, unspoken acknowledgement that they were not ordinary animals. Coda shifted slightly, tail low but body firm, and Rex mirrored him, a subtle but clear signal of readiness. The group froze for a heartbeat, and she knew the moment had arrived. Then it happened. A sudden movement from the leader caused a slight forward motion. Instinctively, her dogs responded not with aggression, but with a swift, protective stance that clearly defined the boundaries of the space around her. Coda stepped forward slightly, eyes locked, chest raised. Rex mirrored him, coiled like a spring, but still controlled. The energy in the air changed instantly. The group froze completely, sensing that the situation was no longer ordinary. That this household, this woman and her dogs were not to be underestimated. Her voice remained calm, unwavering. "Step back," she said softly, with an authority that came not from anger, but from presence and clarity. Her eyes met the leader's, steady and unflinching. The dogs' movements were synchronized, protective but restrained. They did not move aggressively, yet the unspoken message was clear. Any wrong move would be met with immediate and decisive action. The group hesitated, its uncertainty evident in their posture. Neighbors had started to gather quietly at a distance, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Some peeked from behind curtains, others leaned slightly over fences. She was aware of their presence, but did not let it distract her. Her focus remained on the immediate situation, the tension, the subtle movements that could signal escalation or de-escalation. Her dogs remained perfectly attuned to her state, reflecting it in their own posture and attention. The leader took another step forward, but this time more cautiously. Coda and Rex shifted in perfect harmony, a silent reminder that boundaries had been set. She could see the hesitation now, the recognition that her calm authority, combined with the dog's disciplined readiness, had changed the dynamics entirely. She maintained eye contact, voice steady, stance composed. This was not about confrontation. It was about setting clear boundaries and being prepared to protect herself if necessary. The group remained frozen, weighing their options. Every second stretched, but her calm was unshakable. Coda's chest remained forward, tail low, muscles tight but controlled. Rex stayed close to her side, eyes sweeping the street, scanning for any subtle changes. The protective presence was undeniable, and it had shifted the energy completely. She realized then that her preparation, awareness, and the bond with her dogs had created a natural, silent authority that could command respect without aggression. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the leader gestured subtly to the others. They hesitated, one last glance toward the woman and her dogs, then slowly retreated, stepping back toward the street. The tension began to ease, though the moment remained charged with awareness. She remained on the porch, dogs flanking her, watching as they moved down the street. The unspoken message had been received. Boundaries were clear. Respect was due. Her body relaxed slightly, though she remained alert. She reached down to Coda and Rex, rubbing their ears and backs gently, silently thanking them for their instinctive response and loyalty. They responded with small nudges and soft whines, acknowledging her presence and reassurance. She knew that while the danger had passed, the lesson remained: vigilance, preparation, and trust in her companions had prevented a potential escalation. Sitting back on the porch, she reflected on the events. The day had tested patience, awareness, and composure. It had also confirmed the silent power of preparation and partnership. Her dogs had acted instinctively, but under her calm direction. Their behavior had protected her without a single act of aggression, demonstrating that true strength lies in controlled presence, awareness, and trust. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun, the quiet rhythm of her home, and the steady presence of her dogs. The group had moved on. The street was peaceful again, and yet she knew that life could change in an instant. What mattered most was remaining calm, aware, and ready, trusting instincts and relying on loyal companions when needed. Coda and Rex curled at her feet, relaxed now, but their eyes continued to scan subtly, reflecting the awareness that danger could return at any moment. The afternoon passed with the soft hum of life, around her birds singing, leaves rustling, distant voices, but the sense of empowerment remained. She had faced a tense situation, remained composed, and relied on her loyal dogs to act when needed. The lesson was clear. Courage, patience, and trust in those who are loyal can turn uncertainty into control. She poured herself a cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into her hands and chest, and watched her dog settle near her. She knew that this afternoon would be remembered, not for fear or confrontation, but for quiet strength, instinctive awareness, and the deep bond she shared with her companions. Coda and Rex had protected her not through aggression. She woke up to the soft light of morning slipping through the blinds. The house was quiet, except for the gentle breathing of her two dogs curled up at the foot of the bed. She stretched, feeling the warmth of the sun touch her face, and smiled, thinking how peaceful life had been lately. Her little home at the edge of the town was a place she loved. Surrounded by trees, birdsong, and the occasional hum of passing cars, it had always been a safe haven. She had chosen this life intentionally after years of rushing through cities and crowded streets. Here, things moved slowly, and she could breathe. Her dogs stirred at her movement. Lifting their heads, their eyes following her every step, she called them over softly. "Time to get up, guys," she said, rubbing behind their ears. They wagged their tails, stretching, yawning, and padding after her as she moved into the kitchen. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air as she brewed a cup. She looked out the window while the coffee percolated, watching the leaves on the trees sway in the morning breeze. Something felt different, though she couldn't quite say what. Over the last week, she had noticed a few unusual things. Cars had been driving past her house more often than usual, some lingering at the corner before moving on. People she did not recognize had walked past the fence, glancing in before walking away. She thought perhaps she was being overly cautious. After all, life had taught her to trust her instincts, but also not to overreact. Still, today she felt a slight unease tugging at her mind, a feeling she could not ignore entirely. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch with her two dogs at her side. The crisp air hit her face, carrying the scent of pine and freshly cut grass. The dogs sniffed the ground, alert to every sound. She watched the street, seeing the familiar houses and the occasional passerby. All seemed normal at first glance. She took a sip of her coffee and smiled, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Her morning continued like most others. She fed the dogs, giving them their favorite treats, and began tidying up the porch. The routine comforted her. Yet every so often her gaze would drift toward the street, half expecting to see something unusual. Her mind wandered to the news she had heard the day before, stories of small-town incidents that escalated quickly. She reminded herself that she was prepared, that she was capable, and that her dogs were more than just companions. They were protective, loyal, and trained to sense danger. Around mid-morning, she decided to take the dogs for a walk. She clipped their leashes on, feeling their excitement radiate through the harnesses. They loved their walks, and she did too. The movement, the fresh air, and the small sounds of the neighborhood brought a sense of normalcy. As they walked, the dogs sniffed and explored, alert to every sound, a distant bark, a car door slamming, the crunch of gravel under feet. She walked at a calm pace, letting them lead, and felt a sense of calm settle in her chest as they neared the corner of the street. She noticed a car parked oddly, half on the road, half on the shoulder. It was dark-colored, and she hadn't seen it before. She tried to remember if she had noticed it in the past few days. The car didn't move as she passed. Instead, it lingered, and she felt a flicker of unease. Her dogs, sensing her tension, slowed their steps, their ears perked up, and their bodies stiffened slightly. She patted them gently, whispering, "It's okay. Just keep walking." But she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her. After finishing the walk, she returned home, trying to let the unease fade. She gave the dogs water and sat down at her small kitchen table, opening her laptop to start her work. Working from home had its challenges, but it allowed her to maintain this peaceful lifestyle she had built carefully. Still, she found her eyes constantly drifting to the window. The unease had not left her. A few more cars drove past slowly, glancing at the houses as if looking for something. Her heart began to beat a little faster. Later in the morning, there was a knock on the door. She looked up, startled. Visitors were rare, and she hadn't expected anyone. The dogs immediately moved to her side, alert and ready. She walked to the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. Outside were two officers. They wore uniforms and had serious expressions. She hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door, trying to remain calm. "Good morning," one of the officers said. "We are here about a call regarding suspicious activity at this address." Her mind raced. Suspicious activity? She had done nothing wrong, had no ongoing issues, and had only lived here peacefully for years. She swallowed hard, trying to remain polite but firm. "I think there must be a mistake. I live here alone, and I haven't done anything unusual." The officers exchanged a glance. One stepped closer, their body language firm but not threatening. She could feel the tension rising. Her dogs remained calm but alert, standing slightly in front of her, their eyes fixed on the officers. She felt a strange combination of fear and confidence. She knew she was prepared, knew her dogs were protective, and trusted her instincts. The situation felt like it was escalating. She tried to keep her voice steady. "We just need to ask a few questions," the officer said. "It won't take long," she nodded slowly, trying to maintain composure. She stepped slightly back, giving the dogs room to move if necessary. Her heart pounded, but she reminded herself to breathe. The dogs, sensing her stress, positioned themselves closer. A subtle but clear signal that they were aware of the tension and ready to respond if needed, as the conversation continued. She explained her routine, her peaceful life, and the fact that nothing unusual had happened recently. The officers listened, but seemed skeptical, their expressions unreadable. She noticed the neighbors peeking from their windows, sensing something significant was unfolding. She wished the situation could be simpler. She could just walk away and return to her quiet morning, but that was not possible. The officers needed clarification. She needed to protect herself and her home. Throughout the discussion, the dogs remained composed, alert but controlled. Their presence was a comfort to her, reminding her that she was not alone. She spoke calmly, answering every question politely, asserting her innocence without aggression. The officers continued to ask questions, their tone firm, and the tension in the air thickened. Yet she remained steady, guided by her instincts and the silent support of her dogs. By late morning, officers had yet to leave. She offered them water, a gesture of civility, but internally she braced herself for anything. Her mind replayed scenarios she had learned about, ways to handle unexpected situations safely. The dogs never left her side, their protective nature visible in every subtle movement. It was clear to her that the next moments would define how the pursuit situation unfolded. She glanced at her two dogs and felt a surge of gratitude. Their loyalty and awareness gave her strength. She realized that while she might stand alone in life, she was never truly alone in this moment. The morning that had begun peacefully now carried the weight of uncertainty. But it also carried a lesson: preparedness, calmness, and trust in her instincts. Alongside the silent courage of her companions, could guide her through any challenge. As the officers asked another question, she met their gaze firmly, confident in her truth and in the silent guardians at her side. Whatever was about to happen next, she knew she was ready, and she knew that she would not face it without support. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, highlighting the calm determination in her eyes and the steady vigilance of her dogs. The knock on the door had broken the quiet rhythm of the morning, and now the moment stretched longer than she expected. The officers stood firm, polite yet insistent, as though they were trying to balance authority with caution. She could feel her heart beating faster, a mix of worry and alertness. Her dogs mirrored her emotions, standing just behind her, ears raised, eyes watching every subtle movement of the officers. They had always sensed things before she did, reading situations, reading people, and now their instincts told her this was not an ordinary visit. "Please, just answer a few questions," one officer said again, his voice calm but edged with tension. "We received a report, and we need to make sure everything is okay." She nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. I understand. I've lived here for years and nothing unusual has happened. Maybe the report was meant for someone else. She tried to keep her tone gentle but firm. Knowing that any hint of fear or anger might complicate the situation, the first officer stepped closer, and she instinctively stepped back. Her dogs immediately picked up on the movement, moving slightly in front of her, their bodies tense but controlled. They were not aggressive yet, but their presence sent a silent warning. Something was off. She felt a strange mix of reassurance and anxiety. She knew she had to stay calm, not only for herself, but for her dogs. If she panicked, it could make the officers uneasy and escalate things unnecessarily. The officers began asking questions about her day, her neighbors, and whether she had noticed anything unusual. She answered carefully, explaining her routine, the peaceful life she lived, and her careful attention to the neighborhood. She mentioned the unfamiliar cars she had seen recently, and the officers nodded, taking notes. But despite her calm, there was a subtle edge in their voices, a hint that they weren't entirely convinced. She felt the tension in the air grow. Heavier, almost like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Her mind raced. She considered the possibilities: a misdirected report, misunderstanding, or perhaps someone had reported her property by mistake. But she also knew better than to dismiss the situation. Life had taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her to remain cautious. Her dogs pressed slightly closer, their silent vigilance a reminder that she was never truly alone. They were trained for protection, trained to sense threats, and trained to act without hesitation if danger presented itself. Neighbors were starting to notice. One peeked from behind a curtain, another glanced over a fence. She could feel their curiosity and concern, and she realized how exposed she suddenly felt. This wasn't just about her safety anymore. It was a public scene, even if no one spoke aloud. She adjusted her posture, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, making sure her dogs knew her cues. The trust she had built with them over the years was unspoken but absolute. The officers continued their questioning, occasionally glancing at each other as if to confirm details they hadn't shared with her. She answered politely, repeating facts when necessary, clarifying that she had no knowledge of any unusual activity. One officer stepped slightly to the side, speaking in a quieter tone as if trying to gauge her reaction more personally. She maintained eye contact, speaking steadily, letting the calmness in her voice contrast the rising tension in the air. At one point, the officer asked about her dogs. "Are these animals trained?" he inquired, his eyes flicking to Coda and Rex. She nodded. Yes, they are trained for protection, but they are also very calm and disciplined. They would not act aggressively unless there was a real threat. The dogs shifted slightly, almost as if they understood the conversation, their gaze unwavering on the officers. Their posture alone was enough to make her realize. The balance of power had subtly shifted. The officers exchanged glances again, this time a little longer. She sensed a hesitation, a recognition that her dogs were more than just pets. They were intelligent, alert, and capable of defending her if necessary. Her calm confidence, combined with the dog's controlled vigilance, seemed to create an invisible barrier that made the officers reconsider their approach. She allowed herself a small sigh of relief, though she remained aware that the situation was far from over. Her thoughts drifted to the weeks before, the unusual signs she had ignored. Cars lingering at the corner, strangers walking past, small incidents that seemed insignificant at the time. She realized now that her awareness of these small details had prepared her for this very moment. Had she dismissed them entirely, she might not have been ready to handle the uncertainty with such composure. Her dogs had sensed it too, responding before she even had a chance to understand her own feelings fully. The conversation continued for some time. Each question carefully framed, each answer deliberate. She found herself speaking not just for herself, but for the quiet strength of her home, the loyalty of her dogs, and the sense of order she had cultivated. Every movement, every word, was measured. The officers seemed to sense that as well, their tone softening slightly, their posture less rigid. Yet there remained an underlying caution, as though they were trying to reconcile the unexpected presence of her protective companions with the report that had brought them here. Suddenly, the taller officer asked her to step outside briefly, suggesting it would help clarify the situation. She hesitated, feeling the instinctual tug in her chest. Step outside and risk losing control of the situation. Or stay inside, keeping the advantage of her environment and her loyal dogs. She looked at Coda and Rex, their calm but alert expressions offering reassurance. They would follow her, protect her, and act only when necessary. With a steadying breath, she nodded as she stepped onto the porch. The sun was higher in the sky, casting light over the small yard. She could feel the eyes of her neighbors on her, sensing the tension without fully understanding it. Her dogs flanked her, one slightly ahead, the other slightly behind, forming a silent, protective line. The officers watched her carefully, their expressions a mixture of caution and curiosity. She realized that this moment, though brief, could define the next steps. Her calm demeanor and the silent communication with her dogs were the only tools. She needed to maintain control. Questions continued, focusing now on small details of her surroundings, patterns in the neighborhood, and the timeline of her day. She answered each one methodically, emphasizing her awareness and responsibility. The officer's approach began to soften further, their gestures less insistent, their voices more neutral. She recognized the subtle shift, acknowledging that her presence, her composure, and the quiet authority of her dogs were influencing the interaction. At one point, the shorter officer leaned slightly forward and asked about the report again, his tone more inquisitive than authoritative. She explained clearly that she had no knowledge of any suspicious activity and suggested that the report might have been for another address. She remained polite but unwavering, projecting calm confidence. The dogs shifted slightly in response, signaling to her that they were ready for anything, yet remained under control. Their behavior spoke volumes, reinforcing her own calmness and authority in the situation as the minutes passed. The tension began to ebb, replaced by a cautious understanding. The officers seemed to realize that the original report might have been misdirected or inaccurate. They exchanged glances once more, perhaps reconsidering the steps they had taken to approach her home. She maintained her posture, her voice steady, and her dogs alert but relaxed, all signaling that she was not to be underestimated, but also not aggressive. Throughout it all, she remained aware of the small details, the slight movements of the officers' hands, the shifting of weight from one foot to another, the subtle expressions on their faces. She understood that perception and presence mattered as much as words. Her dogs mirrored her awareness, their bodies taut but controlled, ready to act only if absolutely necessary. The situation, though tense, was under her control in a way that required patience, vigilance, and trust in her instincts. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was only a short time, the officers paused. The taller one spoke quietly, almost to himself, reviewing the notes he had taken and the answers she had provided. The shorter officer adjusted his posture, glancing around her yard. Noticing the calm yet alert stance of Coda and Rex, the realization slowly dawned that nothing about her home, her behavior, or her dogs indicated any immediate threat. The report that had brought them here was likely mistaken. She let herself relax slightly, though she did not allow her guard to drop entirely. The officers began to step back, acknowledging the explanation she had given and the visible evidence that no threat existed. Her dogs remained close, their presence still a silent reminder of the seriousness of the moment. The tension that had gripped the morning began to dissolve, leaving a quiet sense of resolution, though not without the lingering awareness of how quickly uncertainty could escalate as the officers prepared to leave. She thanked them politely, offering reassurance that her home and neighborhood were peaceful. They nodded in return, the expressions on their faces a mix of acknowledgement and mild embarrassment for the confusion. Her dogs followed her movements as she closed the door, their eyes still scanning, alert but calm. She exhaled fully for the first time, realizing that the morning had tested her patience, her instincts, and her composure in ways she had not anticipated. Sitting back down, she poured herself another cup of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into her hands. Coda and Rex curled up nearby, their bodies relaxed but ready, as if they knew the day was far from ordinary. She reflected on the morning's events, recognizing how her awareness, careful planning, and the silent support of her dogs had prevented a small misunderstanding from becoming something more serious. It was a morning that had begun quietly, with sunlight streaming through blinds and the gentle sound of breathing. By mid-morning, it had become a lesson in calmness, presence, and the power of quiet loyalty. She knew that life was unpredictable and that moments of tension could arrive without warning. But she also knew that with patience, awareness, and the unspoken bond she shared with her dogs, she could face anything that came her way. The world outside her home continued as usual. Neighbors went about their routines. Cars passed by, birds sang in the trees, but inside, she felt a deeper connection to her own strength and the silent vigilance of her companions. Whatever challenges the day might bring, she understood now that she was never truly alone, and that the presence of those who care, even in silence, can make all the difference in moments of uncertainty. The day had settled into a quiet rhythm again, but the memory of the officer's visit lingered. She sat at the kitchen table, watching the sunlight shift across the floorboards, her dogs at her side, ears twitching at every distant sound. Though the immediate tension had passed, a part of her remained alert. Life had taught her that moments of calm could be deceptive, that instinct often guided her better than logic. She sipped her coffee slowly, feeling the warmth fill her chest. Coda nudged her hand gently, seeking attention, and she smiled, rubbing behind his ears. Rex rested his head on her lap. Eyes alert, but serene. They had always been more than companions. They were protectors, silent sentinels who understood her moods, her movements, and even her unspoken concerns. She trusted them completely. She knew they trusted her in return. As the morning stretched toward noon, she decided to finish some errands around the house. Laundry, dishes, and organizing the small pile of mail on the counter kept her occupied, but her mind wandered. Every so often she glanced out the window, noticing the street, the occasional passerby, and the distant hum of traffic. Something about the morning's events had sharpened her awareness. She realized that even in a peaceful town, she needed to remain vigilant. Around midday, a sudden noise drew her attention. A car had stopped near the corner of her street, its engine idling softly. She watched as the driver looked around, appearing uncertain. Her heart skipped a beat, though she forced herself to remain calm. Coda and Rex immediately lifted their heads, sniffing the air and shifting slightly toward the door. They were alert, sensing the subtle change in energy that she hadn't fully registered yet. She breathed slowly, reminding herself that patience and observation were her best tools. She moved to the front porch, letting the dogs follow close behind. The car remained there, its presence unusual, but not overtly threatening. She could see the driver, now a person she didn't recognize, glancing repeatedly at houses along the street. It wasn't unusual to see new faces in the neighborhood from time to time. But there was something about the way this person lingered, their attention deliberate and cautious. She felt a flicker of unease, a tiny warning in the back of her mind. The dog's behavior mirrored her feelings. Coda stepped slightly ahead, sniffing the air, ears perked, eyes focused. Rex stayed close to her side, scanning the surroundings, muscles tense but controlled. They had always been able to sense things before she did, responding to subtle changes in tone, movement, or scent. Their presence was reassuring, but it also reminded her that the day was far from ordinary. She considered whether to confront the situation directly or simply observe. Stepping outside could provide clarity, but it also carried risks. She knew that if the stranger had intentions beyond curiosity, a sudden move could escalate things. She decided to watch carefully, allowing the dogs to guide her reactions. Their instincts were sharp, honed by years of training and experience. She had trusted them through countless minor incidents, and she would trust them now. Minutes passed. The stranger remained near the corner, occasionally glancing in her direction. She noted the posture, the way the hands rested on the steering wheel, the slight shifts in weight as if preparing for something. Every detail mattered. Her dogs shifted subtly, a movement almost imperceptible but full of meaning. They were alert, ready, and fully aware of her emotional state. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself in the present, letting her awareness grow sharper. She remembered the officers from earlier in the day. Their visit had been unsettling, even if it had ended peacefully. The memory of their cautious steps, the questions asked, and the careful assessment of her dog's behavior reminded her that authority and instinct could intersect in unexpected ways. She realized that this new presence on the street, though not immediately threatening, required the same balance of calm, vigilance, and readiness. Her thoughts drifted to her training. Not formal military training, not anything extreme, but a lifetime of learning to assess situations, to remain composed under pressure, and to trust her instincts. She had learned that fear was often a signal, not a command, that patience could prevent escalation, and that preparation, both mental and physical, could make all the difference in moments of uncertainty. The dogs had been part of this preparation, a living extension of her awareness. Silent partners who understood the language of attention and caution. The stranger's car eventually moved a few feet forward. Stopping again, this time closer to her house, she observed carefully, noting the patterns of movement, the focus on her property, and the subtle signals that suggested observation rather than mere coincidence. Coda stepped slightly in front of her, tail low but body tense, a silent question asking how she wanted to respond. She placed a hand on his back, feeling the controlled strength beneath his fur, and whispered softly, "Stay calm. Let's see what happens." Rex leaned closer to her, eyes sharp, body coiled like a spring, ready for any necessary action. The minutes stretched. Her heart remained steady, but her senses were heightened. She noticed small details she might have missed before, the way the stranger's hands moved, the slight glances toward the other houses, the almost imperceptible tension in the shoulders. She considered possible explanations. Perhaps the person was lost, perhaps a delivery had been delayed, perhaps curiosity had led them here. But the feeling in her chest, the tension in the dogs' bodies, and the subtle signals in the environment suggested she could not ignore the situation. She moved slightly back toward, letting the dogs take the lead without appearing confrontational. Their movements were deliberate, calm, but assertive. Coda positioned himself slightly ahead, a silent statement that he was aware and ready. Rex stayed close, scanning the surroundings, muscles coiled but relaxed. She understood the unspoken communication between them. They were not aggressive, but they were protective, ready to respond to any threat while remaining under control. Her mind raced with possibilities, planning contingencies for any escalation. She knew that remaining calm was essential, but she also needed to be prepared for rapid decisions. She considered calling someone, alerting a neighbor, or even simply observing until the stranger moved along. But her dog's instincts were sharper than any plan she could make in the moment. She trusted them to provide guidance through their silent cues. The stranger eventually stepped out of the car. Glancing around, seemingly uncertain, her heart beat a little faster, but she remained composed, letting the dogs guide her stance and movements. Coda shifted slightly, muscles tensing, eyes fixed. Rex mirrored him, coiled and ready, but calm. She whispered softly, "Stay with me. We'll handle this." Her voice was steady, and the dogs responded instantly, their attention sharpening even further. The stranger began walking slowly toward the street, glancing occasionally in her direction. She remained still, careful not to provoke or appear confrontational. The dogs flanked her subtly, forming a natural protective line, a barrier that communicated readiness without aggression. The stranger hesitated, sensing the energy shift but unable to interpret it fully. She realized then the true power of presence, how calm, confidence, combined with vigilance, could alter the behavior of those around her without a single raised voice. Neighbors had begun to notice again, eyes peeking from windows and over fences. She understood their curiosity, but she focused entirely on the moment, letting the world beyond her yard fade into the background. The situation was delicate, requiring observation, patience, and the trust she had in her loyal companions. The morning had taught her the importance of vigilance, and now, this new development was a test of patience, judgment, and the bond she shared with Coda and Rex. As the stranger continued to walk, she noted small changes the way their head turned, The rhythm of their steps, the subtle hesitation in movement. She adjusted her stance, shifting slightly, allowing the dogs to respond naturally. Coda stepped forward slightly, his body language clear but controlled. Rex mirrored him, maintaining a close position but scanning the surroundings. The stranger paused, clearly aware of the subtle but unmistakable presence of protection. Time seemed to stretch as the tension built. Every movement, every glance, every breath mattered. She felt a mix of anxiety and reassurance, knowing that the outcome depended on composure, awareness, and the silent communication between her and her dogs. The moment was delicate, balanced between potential danger and careful observation. She trusted her instincts and the instincts of Coda and Rex, understanding that their training and loyalty would guide the situation toward resolution if approached carefully. Finally, the stranger took a step back, seemingly reconsidering their actions. Her heart remained steady, and she allowed herself a small, controlled sigh. Coda and Rex relaxed slightly, but did not lose their alertness. She understood the subtle shift, the recognition that the energy she projected, combined with the presence of her dogs, had altered the dynamics of the encounter. The stranger returned to the car, hesitating briefly before driving away. She watched until the vehicle turned the corner and disappeared from view. Only then did she allow herself to relax fully, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. The morning had tested her patience, her judgment, and her instincts. But it had also confirmed the unspoken strength of her bond with Coda and Rex. Sitting back on the porch, she reflected on the morning. It had begun peacefully, with sunlight and quiet, and had escalated into a test of vigilance, composure, and awareness. She realized that moments of tension were part of life, and that preparation, calmness, and trust in those around, especially loyal companions, were invaluable. Her dogs curled up nearby, content yet alert, and she knew that together they had faced the challenge with quiet strength and resilience. The day continued, the sunlight shifting across the porch, the neighborhood returning to its but through presence, discipline, and loyalty. And in that protection, she had discovered the true power of preparation.com. Trust the lessons she would carry forward for the rest of her life. The street finally returned to its normal rhythm. Cars passed by, children played a little further down, and the neighbors' cautious glances had faded. The lingering tension that had gripped the morning and afternoon began to ease, replaced by the quiet relief that comes after uncertainty passes. She stood on the porch for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun wash over her, feeling the gentle breeze through her hair, and listened to the faint rustle of leaves in the trees. Coda and Rex remained at her sides, alert but relaxed, their presence a calming reminder of loyalty and trust. She thought back over the events of the day, the officers, the stranger, the tense standoff on her porch, and realized how much had unfolded in such a short time. Each moment had demanded her full attention, patience, and composure. She had stayed calm, guided by instincts honed over years, and supported by the quiet vigilance of her dogs. She allowed herself a deep breath, feeling the relief of knowing that the situation had ended without harm. Still, the adrenaline of those moments lingered faintly in her chest, a subtle reminder that vigilance was never truly optional. Coda nudged her hand gently, sensing her reflective mood, and she smiled, stroking his fur. Rex leaned closer, resting his head against her leg, eyes alert but soft. She felt a deep appreciation for their presence, for the silent partnership that had carried her through the tension. The events of the day had not been ordinary, yet they had reinforced the bond between her and her dogs, trust that went far beyond commands or training. It was instinct, understanding, and loyalty intertwined, a connection that could guide them through uncertainty. As she walked back into the house, she noticed the small imperfections left behind by the day, the slightly crooked chair, a few leaves scattered on the porch, the mail she had set aside in the morning. Normally, these details might have bothered her, but now they felt trivial. The day had shown her what truly mattered: awareness, presence, and the strength of silent allies. She placed her hands on the counter, letting herself reflect quietly. The sunlight spilling through the windows highlighted the subtle movements of Coda and Rex as they circled the room, checking doors, sniffing the air, always vigilant, always protective. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat down at the small table near the window. The warmth of the tea was comforting, a small anchor in a day that had been anything but ordinary. She considered the lessons the day had offered, understanding that preparedness, calmness, and loyalty were more than abstract concepts. They were tools for navigating life. Her dogs had demonstrated that strength did not always come from aggression, but from presence, discipline, and awareness. They had protected her without a single act of violence, proving the quiet power of trust and instinct. Her mind wandered to the neighbors. She knew that some of them had watched the events unfold, likely unaware of the full story, but sensing the unusual energy on the street, she hoped they understood that the day's tension had resolved peacefully and that no one had been harmed. She also felt a sense of gratitude for the community, even if it had only been in the background for the simple knowledge that people were nearby. Even in solitude, there was reassurance in the faint presence of others. She glanced at her dogs, her ears flicking at distant sounds, bodies relaxed but attentive. She realized that the events of the day had strengthened her awareness, her patience, and her confidence. Each action, each decision had mattered. The calm she had maintained, the trust she had placed in her companions, and the measured responses to the uncertainty had created a resolution that was safe, respectful, and powerful. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for Coda and Rex, understanding that their instinctive loyalty had prevented what could have been a far more complicated situation. After a few moments of quiet reflection, she decided to check the perimeter of her property, a habit that had become second nature over the years. Walking slowly through the yard, she noted every detail: the gate latch, the fence, the small plants along the edge of the porch. Coda and Rex followed closely, occasionally sniffing the air or pausing to observe subtle movements. The day's events had reinforced the importance of awareness, but they had also demonstrated that vigilance paired with calm and understanding created true security. She felt grounded, confident that she had done everything possible to ensure safety. Returning to the porch, she allowed herself to sit once more, letting the sun warm her face. She reflected on the morning's officer visit and the stranger's approach, recognizing that while the events had been unnerving, they had also revealed the strength that comes from calmness, observation, and partnership. The dogs lay at her feet, still alert, tails twitching occasionally. Their presence reminded her that she had allies in every sense that mattered. Not only did they provide physical protection, but they also offered a sense of emotional security, a grounding force that allowed her to remain composed under pressure. She thought about how quickly situations could change in life, how ordinary moments could transform into tests of patience, judgment, and awareness. The lesson was clear: panic and fear could cloud perception, while calmness, observation, and trust could navigate uncertainty effectively. The dogs had embodied this lesson, acting without aggression, but with precise, instinctive protection. She reached down to stroke their fur, feeling their warmth and sensing their readiness, a reassuring continuity that had been present throughout the tension of the day. Neighbors had started to emerge from their homes, some walking by, others pausing to wave. She acknowledged them with a nod, feeling the comfort of normalcy returning. The street no longer held the tension that had marked the morning and afternoon. The events had concluded peacefully, and yet the memories remained. A quiet reminder of the importance of presence, awareness, and loyalty. She smiled softly, realizing that even ordinary days could teach extraordinary lessons. She reflected on the officer visit again, considering the dynamics that had unfolded. The situation had required measured responses, calm communication, and trust in her instincts. Her dogs had been critical to maintaining balance, providing silent guidance and protection. The encounter had been a test of awareness and patience, and the outcome had been shaped by calm authority and disciplined readiness, rather than confrontation or force. It was a subtle, yet powerful, demonstration of the strength that comes from preparation and partnership. Later, She moved inside to continue her daily routine, but everything felt different now. Ordinary tasks like folding laundry, washing dishes, or organizing papers carried a new perspective. She had experienced the tension and uncertainty of an unexpected challenge and emerged with confidence, calm, and a deeper understanding of her own capabilities. Coda and Rex followed closely, responding to her cues with a natural harmony that spoke to the depth of their bond. As evening approached, the sunlight softened, casting a golden glow across the living room. She sat on the couch with her dogs nearby, reflecting quietly. The day had begun like any other, filled with routine and comfort. Yet it had evolved into a series of moments that demanded focus, composure, and trust. She understood now more than ever that strength is not measured by aggression or control, but by the ability to remain calm, aware, and responsive in the face of uncertainty. Her dogs had exemplified this principle, protecting her with instinctive awareness and unwavering loyalty. She thought about what she would tell others if asked about the events of the day. She would speak about the importance of calm, preparation, and trust. She would explain how vigilance and awareness could prevent escalation. She would speak of her dogs not only as companions, but as guardians, whose presence and instinctive understanding had guided her through moments of tension. It was a story not of fear, but of preparedness, partnership. In respect for the natural flow of energy in uncertain situations, the night drew closer, and she began preparing dinner, Coda and Rex following her closely, tails swishing gently, eyes alert. The house was quiet except for the familiar sounds of clinking dishes and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the resolution of the day, but for the lessons it had offered. Awareness, calm, and loyalty had proven far more powerful than fear or aggression. She poured a cup of tea for herself and sat by the window watching the stars emerge, feeling the steady presence of her dogs at her side as she reflected on the day. She realized that life's challenges could come without warning, and that preparation, patience, and trust were essential. Coda and Rex had been her silent partners, guiding her through tension with calm authority. Their instinctive protection had transformed a potentially unsettling day into a story of quiet strength, resilience, and partnership. She understood that these lessons would stay with her, shaping her responses to future challenges and deepening her connection with her loyal companions. The neighborhood settled into its quiet evening rhythm. She felt the serenity of her home, the gentle presence of her dogs, and the satisfaction of having navigated the day's tension successfully. She knew that challenges could arise again, but she also knew that with calm, awareness, and loyal companions by her side, she could face them with confidence. She leaned back, letting the warmth of the evening settle over her, grateful for the bond she shared with Coda and Rex, and for the lessons the day had brought. Finally, as night fell, she allowed herself a deep, relaxing breath. The day had tested her, strengthened her, and reminded her of the power of calm presence, preparation, and loyalty. Coda and Rex lay at her feet, their breathing steady, bodies relaxed, but ready if needed. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that she was never truly alone, and that the bond she shared with her dogs had not only protected her physically, but it also strengthened her emotionally. The events of the day would remain with her, a reminder of the quiet, powerful strength that comes from trust, vigilance, and loyalty.